Here in these books of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, the original set, there's a great word, and it is milieu. It's perfect. It's not the same as setting in a somewhat broader or sense. It's not genre associated in any restrictive sense, and it is very much about those things which are relevant to play. And I like it. I'm glad that it's used in these books and helps me think about what we're doing. But as with so many things across these texts, the presence of what seem to be different authors, and in many cases are probably the same author, but just writing at different times and toward different purposes or different responses or arguments, creates a mixed message of kind of profound problem making. So what do I mean? And again, this is about all of the three texts. The Fiend Folio is a bit of an outlier because it's completely sourced completely differently. But if we take a look at the Player's Handbook, the Monster Manual, and the DM Guide, there is a running set of concepts that, again, exist more of a complex of conflict among one another, but they're throughout, and they're in large and small forms, just running through the whole things. One of them is this notion of a given dungeon master is working on and values the individual, the absolutely local milieu of play, and that this is often referred to as your milieu in the text, and honors that. It even says specifically that if you are taking a published adventure module, for example, that you are expected to alter it, not because some terrible player is reading it and you want to catch them by surprise, but because this is your thing and you are not to be beholden to anyone who just published something and, oh no, I have to change, that's how it works. Oh, I better do that. No, this is something for you to, chop at and use what you want. And it's your milieu which is being built here. And the same thing applies to a lot of other details. The individualized spell lists, which are expected to evolve, spells of your own making as the dungeon master, or spells of the player's making, so that you end up with your own notions of what magic can do. And furthermore, the customization of the artifacts is a really formal example, and there's a bunch of others. The concept of playing the monsters as NPCs and really developing what a given monster or monster type even is. That this is very much yours. Remember, there's no canonical religion, or textual, I should say. There's no textual religion in these books, and so therefore all of that, the entire context of the presence of clerics and druids and all the various different interpretations of that with alignment are up to you. And in most cases, these are explicitly stated in there. I mean, you get the idea that this particular author's voice isn't interested in training you to be a dungeon master using that person's stuff and operating the procedures as kind of a junior expression of that person's game design and content creation. No, that author wants peers. That author wants dungeon masters like themselves to be out there doing the thing and potentially, enjoying themselves very thoroughly and very autonomously. And it's fun to read that stuff. Then there's a somewhat subtler approach, which is very dogmatic about what is and isn't in the content of play. Some of it seems kind of spurious, and some of it is at least discussably argued. One of the latters is the business about monsters as player characters. He argues against it. I don't agree with the argument, but it's discussable. I mean, it's actually, not insane or out of line in any way what Gygax has to say about that. So then there are things which seem to be a little bit out of left field, and then certain things that are really, really solid. It is this way. These monsters are where, your soul goes after you die. You become one of these. Other things that are super fixed in place, and sometimes they're playful, like some description of the magic item might be referring to something or seem to have a backstory of some kind, or have content basically baked into that item. Some of it's very playful, and some of it isn't playful at all. The social stuff, the costs of, castle construction, the really serious business about the social elements of play, much of which seems to be an excuse to simply extract all this loose cash away from the player characters, but really is extremely dogmatic about how this works. Some of it is also interesting, baked into the character classes, and I think a lot of this comes from Arneson, if I understand this properly, with things like the assassins and the monks, druids, and so forth, which very definitely have a social structure of the level procedure. This brings up a very interesting notion of how does adventuring relate to the development of the milieu. Because how much of that milieu's features are supposed to be cemented into place simply because you are playing Dungeons and Dragons. And therefore, if you were not to have that cemented into place, for example, in a Thieves Guild or something like that, did you just deviate from things that are arguably to be locked down, regardless of whatever else you're going to do with your milieu? That's a good question. And a lot of it seems to involve these human social interactions and the framework of play. And it really shows up with cities. Because as soon as you provide encounter tables for cities, and as soon as you start really baking in much of those location-oriented aspects of the milieu. I mean, if we're over here, then this is happening, or we're over here, then this is what happened 100 years ago. As soon as that starts becoming important in play, cities just don't seem to work like the dungeons. According to the text, and very much in line with Holmes and also with Tunnels and Trolls, and with the original 74, you can start with a dungeon. And you can play basically just sort of, teleporting away from the top step when you leave and teleporting to the top step when you arrive for a little while. And then sooner or later you start thinking about, where this thing is. What is there some sort of fantasy history here? What's the geography? I mean, we've mentioned this and mentioned that. And you start wanting the whole thing to allow you, to walk around. I mean, is your character married? I mean, there is that business in the Advanced Player's Handbook about next of kin, for example, which I keep forgetting about and keep wanting to instate. But anyway, so you can build out from a dungeon. You can go in and out of it, and you can build outward, and it's actually kind of okay. In fact, the randomized stuff, like the encounters, are supposed to be when you hit the edges of that. But cities are a little different. Cities need to be making a lot more of that sense from the start, and then you find yourself in the business of populating, explaining, designing, mapping in a way that's super not integrated with play itself. And I think it makes a lot more sense for the city to be better conceived than the sort of amorphous non-world around an isolated dungeon that you could start with. But On the other hand, the idea of, arriving at a 372 page tome of this city so that we know exactly what's going on and like what level the bartender is of what class, this isn't what arriving at your milieu is supposed to be or could be. And it certainly doesn't have that organic and casually creative factor that I see, favored in some of the other text. Add to that one more factor of published settings. Now, I may have missed one or two, but I don't think there are hardly any references to Greyhawk in these texts. Some, but it seems to be a bit optional. It seems to be a bit on, oh, and by the way, I have this thing that I've been playing for a while. I like it. You might like it. And it doesn't really have, okay, Dungeons and Dragons is set in the world of Greyhawk. That's how it is. Whereas a great deal of the published adventures, either whether that they started that way or whether they get repurposed that way for publication, they start telling you like where it is in the world of Greyhawk. So there's, I guess you could call that even a third approach, where you do have this other place this place that to play, you are playing in it. Well, that's all I have to say about it. The sort of contradictory voices regarding this issue and how it particularly applies to cities, which is what I'm facing.